Today we are going to be running through a walkthrough of the Headless machine on Hack the Box, which is an easy Linux machine. It's got a few steps. First of all, we exploit a stored cross-site scripting vulnerability that, it's quite ironic, is actually introduced through trying to prevent cross-site scripting issues on the website. Through this vulnerability, we can steal the administrator user's cookie and then authenticate as them on the website, which opens us up to some restricted functionality. This functionality is vulnerable to command injection. Using this vulnerability, we can get a reverse shell on the machine as a low privilege user. This user has a sudo privilege that allows them to execute a bash script as root. This bash script is vulnerable. It's vulnerable specifically around executing a file in the local directory. So it hasn't been protected against, I'm going to call it a path attack. And that allows us to write a custom script in the directory that we're currently in that's writable. And any command within that script will be run as root. Just for reference sake, I do store the IP of the target machine in my file IP, and I'm using this format here to retrieve the IP. So just executing command within a command. So we can see we are getting a response back, so everything looks good. So with that, we can run our nmap scan. Let me just get my sudo privileges here. So I'm using the -p- flag here to scan all ports at a min rate of 500 and making the output very verbose. So we can see immediately that port 22 is open on TCP on 10.10.11.8. Let's just wait a few moments and check to see if there's any other ports open. Okay, great. So we can see that port 22 and port 5000 are both open on TCP. Let's run a full nmap scan against these ports. So first of all, we have -sc for default scripts, -sv for version enumeration, and then OA for output all formats. We'll store it in the file called nmap. Take our IP address for ports 22 and 5000 and make it very verbose. I like to see what's happening. Perfect. So let's let that run in the background. While that runs, let's have a look at the service running on port 5000. First thing I like to do is just run a simple netcat command against the service. So we don't get any service enumeration here. Let's just send some junk data and see what we get in the response. And we do get a HTML response back. So immediately that does point to some HTTP service running. It appears to be a 400 bad request. We can verify this using curl instead. Yep, perfect. And we do get a HTTP response back. From the headers, we can see this is a Python server being run. And we do have a cookie being set automatically, which is this isAdmin cookie. So that may be useful for us a bit later down the track. All right, perfect. So with that in mind, let's navigate to our browser. First of all, let me get my instance of burp up. Perfect. Then let's go to our browser. I'm using the extension Foxy Proxy to connect to my burp proxy. And then let's navigate over to port 5000. Okay, so it looks like we have just a basic construction site with some countdown. It does link to this support page that we have here, so we can have a look at that. But also in the background, let's run a dirbuster scan. Before we do that, let's just review the output of nmap and see if we get any other results here. So port 22 SSH as expected, and port 5000 we can see it's using a GET request to retrieve this information back. So all looks standard. That looks good. Let's run our fuff command against the server. So that's our URL. Then I'm going to be using the seclist word list here. And then I'm going to use raft smallwords.text. And then we can write that to fuff-main.out. And we can see if we get any other results back. Oh, first of all, I'm using port 8000, not port 5000. So let's fix that up. Okay. And we do get another endpoint here, dashboard. So if we review that endpoint here, we can see that we're getting an unauthorized error back. Fuff is reporting this as a 500 response. However, the browser is automatically setting our cookie. So if we remove that cookie, I'm expecting that we also get a 500 response back. Yep. So it looks like the server is not properly handling the absence of the isAdmin cookie, leading to the 500 internal server error. But with our cookie, we can see that we're getting 401 unauthorized. So it looks like we need to be a authenticated user of some sort to be able to access that endpoint. While that runs, let's have a look at the support endpoint. Okay, so we can see that we get this contact support form. Let's have a look at the functionality of this form. I'm just going to put in some data and submit a request. And then let's navigate back to Burp and see what happened here. So let's send another request through. And we can see we get a 200 OK. It looks like the contact support form is just returned back to us after a successful request. Okay, so that's the functionality. Immediately when I see support, or contact forms or something like that, there's an assumption that maybe there's some user here reviewing the actual tickets being raised. So with that assumption in mind, I'm going to opt for a cross-site scripting attack in the hope that if a victim user accesses one of these tickets that I've raised, that a malicious JavaScript payload that I've injected is executed in their browser. And then that would allow me to, for instance, steal the admin cookie, assuming this cookie doesn't have HTTP only set. We can check that flag by just having a look at the cookies within our browser developer tools, and we can see that HTTP only is set to false, which means that we can use this cookie within our JavaScript. So let's try and do something like that. I'm going to first of all try and inject within the message field here. This is the free text field, probably the most likely to be vulnerable to cross-site scripting. So let's have a look at that. I'm just going to put in a simple script tag here. I'm going to try and connect back to myself. We can see that Fuff has finished. It's only found those two endpoints. That's fine. Let's try and have it connect back to ourselves. My IP is 10.10.14.8. Let's start a Python server on port 80 for 10.10.14.8. Okay. And then let's send that through. And we do get a response, hacking attempt detected. So if we review this response here, we get hacking attempt detected, your IP has been flagged, a report with your browser information has been sent to the administrators for investigation. And then we have some client request information that's being rendered in the browser. And we can see that the headers that were actually sent as part of this request are being rendered within the browser response here. For example, content length, 155. We have our cookie being returned here, and we have upgrade insecure request 1. Let's just try and put in a random header here and see if this one also gets returned, and it does. So an interesting here is that the header information is being rendered within these styled tags. For example, like the strong tags here. Let's take this and actually see it in action in the browser. So let's submit another request. But within the message, let's put in another malicious payload. I'm going to do a basic one here. And then let's put in a random header here, but let's try and add our own tags. I like to use the B tags. A lot of the times with sanitization libraries, particularly for cross-site scripting, it will allow stuff like B tags and I tags, bold and italic, because they're non-malicious tags. But it's a good test to see if the site is vulnerable to, HTML injection. And then if it is, you could leverage that into potentially getting cross-site scripting. So let's try and do a B tag here and forward that across. And we do see that our payload is bolded. And if we navigate to the inspector here, we can see the B tags are rendered as valid HTML. So instead of injecting our payload within the message here, we can leave a malicious message, but then take this same JavaScript and add it to our header value. And using the assumption we had before that there's some sort of bot or admin here that's reviewing these malicious attempts, we can test to see if our JavaScript is being executed in the browser, allowing us to get cross-site scripting. So let's do exactly that. First of all, as a proof of concept, I'm going to take this same script tag here, and instead of here, I'm going to put it within there. Okay, that looks good. Make sure our Python server is still up. Perfect. And let's send that away in burp. Hacking attempt detected, but we see that it appears that our script tags are being added successfully. So let's go back to our server, and just like that, we do get a hit from 10.10.11.8, which is our web server that we're attacking here. So we can assume that there is some sort of bot admin that is reviewing these malicious requests, and our JavaScript is being executed successfully. So instead of retrieving an external JavaScript file like this, knowing that the cookie is not protected with the HTTP only flag, we can attempt to have a request sent back to us in a similar way, but within the request, we can attempt to have the cookie, the document cookie. It'll make more sense when I do the payload. So let's go back to burp and modify our script accordingly. So first of all, let's create a new image object here and set the source of the object equal to, again, our server, but let's set a endpoint here. This is just an arbitrary endpoint. This can be anything. And then we can say cookie is equal to, and then I'll close that off with my quote there, and then add document.cookie. So the hope here is that when this JavaScript is executed in the victim user's browser, it will first create a new image object and then set the src of that image equal to 10.10.14.8, which is me, and then this retrieve endpoint, and then setting the value of this cookie parameter to the document.cookie that's stored within the victim user's browser, in the hopes that we will be able to retrieve there is admin cookie here. So let's reset our listener here and send this request off. We get hacking attempt detected as expected. We do have our script tag that appears to be rendered correctly. So let's go back and wait to see if that gets executed. I'll just pause the video here. Okay, so after a little bit of time there, we do get a hit from the server, and we can see that our retrieve endpoint is requested and cookie is set to isAdmin equal to this value here. So let's take this value and replace our own cookie with this value. Now, if we navigate back to the dashboard endpoint, which we previously were unable to request, we can see that we now have access. Perfect. So it looks like for this dashboard action here, it just requires a date and then submits. So very similar to the contact, let's just provide an arbitrary value, generate report, and we get this response back, systems are up and running. Let's view that in our history here. And again, let's send that across. And we can see systems are up and running, all looks good. Okay, so knowing that we're on a Linux machine, we can attempt to get command injection within this date field. Easiest way to get some payloads, if you're not familiar, is just, in my opinion, going to Hacktrix and then going for, Linux command injection. Perfect. So, got some good examples here. These ones are particularly good for Linux and Unix operating systems. Let's just start with some Unix ones. Let's just try this payload here with the backticks. So let's copy that across and add it to the end of our date field here. Now, if we send that across, we just get systems up and running. That doesn't necessarily mean that our command was not executed, but because we're not actually getting a response back relating to this data that's sent within the date field here, we do need to try for blind command injection. So instead of relying on output on the response itself here, let's try and have a command that reaches out to us. That way we can see if command injection is working through a blind mechanism. So very similar, I'm going to start a new HTTP server on port 80. And instead of using the ls command that we have here, let's just do a curl command. And again, 10.10.14.8 is me, that's my IP. And we can see that the 10.10.11.8 server does reach out to us and attempts to get this, base file here on 10.10.14.8. So it's confirmed that command injection is possible. So now that we have command injection, let's leverage that to get a reverse shell. Again, let's have a look and get a bash reverse shell. Go to payload all the things. And I like to use this netcat OpenBSD. I feel it's pretty reliable. But I take this payload and use CyberChef to base64 encode it, just to avoid any special characters interfering. So let's replace my IP address with 10.10.14.8 and a port of 1234. We do see one special character here, this plus character just before the J. Plus characters can be particularly dangerous, especially when our payload is being sent within HTTP requests, as URL encoded a plus as a space. So it can cause issues in our payload. So we should navigate around this area here and try and remove this plus. So we can do that just by adding a space there, and we can see that plus is now removed. That does introduce another plus further down the line there, around here. So again, let's put in another space, and it looks all good. So let's copy this base64 encoded payload and go back to burp here. So first of all, I'm going to echo my base64 encoded payload. Then I'm going to pipe it to base64-d to decode it. And then I'm going to pipe the response of the decoded payload to bash. Before I send that off, let's set up our listener on port 1234. And let's send this request. The server is hanging and we do get a shell. So we can see who we are. We are this user diver, and we can access Devir's home directory and fetch the user flag. Perfect. What I will do is leverage this SSH service it's running and add my public key to the authorized keys file. That way we can get a SSH session running. So this is my public key that I have. Let's copy this key and use the echo command to echo it to the authorized keys file. Let's just make sure that was written correctly. It wasn't. So let's move the authorized keys file to authorized keys without the double A. That looks better. And set the permissions correctly. All right, perfect. So now we should be able to SSH into this machine as Devir. So let's do exactly that. Perfect. So now we have a much more stable session as Devir on the machine. We can see straight away that we do have mail. So let's navigate to var mail and have a look at that. So we can see we have this message from Headless about an important update for this new system check script. And we've got special privileges to use this script. So we could run linps or something like that, but this looks like a pretty good target for exploitation. So let's try and find that script. Very first thing I like to do is check out the op directory. In this case, there is no op directory on the machine, so we won't have any scripts in there. Next thing we can try is our sudo privileges. And we can see that we do, in fact, have special permission, as the mail said, to run this USR bin syscheck program as root. First of all, we can see that this syscheck is a bash script. It's a shell script. Let's have a look at the permissions. We can read this file, so let's investigate. So just going down the track here, first of all, it specifically checks that the UID is equal to 0. If it's not equal to 0, then it's going to exit, which basically means if I don't run this syscheck program as root, then exit before we get to the actual functionality. Then we set a few different variables here. So this last modified time, it's set to the output of this very long command here. It's using the find command, but it's using the absolute path to all of these different binaries here. So find command, find all the files within this boot directory that begin with that name. And then for each file, execute the stat command. And then it's piping the output to sort and tail and producing one output and assigning it to last modified time. Formatted time is working in a very similar way. It's running the date command and then formatting it using that syntax there. And then it's echoing this last kernel modification time to formatted time. Going down, we can see disk space, again, using this df and awk and just formatting different data. Very similar to this one here. We can see if not usr bin pgrep for initdb.sh. So let's just try and execute this command separately and see if that condition is met. It looks like that condition is met because nothing is returned. Let's try it with the ndev null. Yep. So we can see that that condition will be met. So this will be run as well as this initdb.sh, and this will not be run. The vulnerability here is around this initdb.sh script here. We can see it's using // to load the initdb.sh script, which means it's checking for that file within the directory that the user is running this command in. So you don't need to be within usr bin to run syscheck. You can be within that directory. Let me do sudo syscheck, and we can see it runs fine. However, when I'm in usr bin, I'm not going to be able to write any files to this directory without special root privileges. So I couldn't write, hey to initdb.sh here. I get permission denied. However, we can go to temp and still run usr bin syscheck just fine from temp. But we can write anything we want to temp at all because it's temp directory. So what we can do is, knowing that it's going to run this initdb.sh script from the current directory that we're in, we can write our own initdb.sh script that will execute as root. So let's make a new directory Cooper and let's nano initdb.sh. First of all, I'm going to do a bin bash shebang there. And just as a proof of concept, let's execute the command who am I, and then redirect the output of that command to the file temp cooper whoami.out. So let's make sure that is executable. And then let's run our syscheck command as sudo. So we can see that that has successfully run. If we review the contents of temp cooper, we now have whoami.out. And if we cat that file, we can see root. So we know that we do have command execution as root. Instead of just running whoami, let's do another reverse shell as root. So let's go back to our payload here. We can take this exact same one. Let's copy that. And let's copy it in here. Base64 decode to bash. Again, let's start a listener on port 1234. And let's run our sudo command again. So it is hanging, which is a good sign, which means we can double check, and we do get a connection back. And we now, if it works. Yep, just took a little bit of time there, but we now have a shell as root. So we can navigate to the root directory and grab the root.txt. And then if we want a persistent shell, again, we can write our public key to .sh and log in as root. So that's the machine. Hope that was useful. Have a great day. Thank you.